All right, so get this. Have you ever thought about how blind people dream? Like, without visuals?
It's really hard to wrap your head around, right? Because like we're so visually oriented.
Exactly. Like, I just can't even imagine it.
Yeah.
So thankfully for this deep dive, we have Angel to kind of be our guide.
Yeah.
He's a visually impaired musician and tech enthusiast, and he has this YouTube channel called Tiflo Academy.
Oh, cool.
So we're going to be checking out one of his videos. And in this video, I mean, he just gets right into it. He's like debunking myths, sharing personal experiences. He even gets a little like frustrated at some of these misconceptions that are out there.
Yeah, I bet. Like I feel like people just don't even think about it.
Yeah. And like, what do you even ask, right? So what are some of the myths that he's like tackling in this video?
Well, I'm sure like the biggest one is that blind people don't dream.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Like straight off the bat, he goes there and he's just like, come on, people. Like, we dream just like everyone else.
Yeah.
And he's even, like, playfully joking about how tired he is of having to explain this.
I can imagine. It's like this fundamental part of being human,
Yeah.
that people are assuming that without sight, it just doesn't exist.
It's like people think that they don't have an inner world at all.
Right.
But he's very clear that blind people experience the full spectrum of dreams, like nightmare, those weird dreams that don't make sense. And even he doesn't shy away from this erotic dreams.
Which is interesting. I mean, it shows that, our brains are wired for these experiences.
Yeah.
Like, regardless of physical abilities, dreams are kind of this, like, universal language.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea, like a universal language. So let's get into the specifics of how those dreams play out, because Angel talks about how, for him, touch, smell, and hearing are super heightened in his dreams.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have visual input, it's like your brain is going to compensate. It's going to dial up the sensitivity of other senses.
Yeah, and he describes it as being able to visualize through touch.
Oh, wow.
So, like, for instance, he shared a dream where he felt a car crashing down a slope.
Oh, God.
So even though he couldn't see it, that physical sensation of, like, the descent and the impact made the dream feel incredibly real to him.
Yeah.
It's, like, so impactful.
It really challenges that assumption that you need visuals to have a sense of reality in a dream.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if we're missing out as sighted people.
Oh, for sure.
Like a whole other layer.
Yeah.
By not being as attuned to those senses.
Now, imagine if we could, like, tap into that consciously.
Right.
Use it for problem solving or creativity.
It's like a whole world of untapped potential in there.
Exactly.
And it's not just touch. He talks about how sound plays a crucial role in shaping his dreamscapes. So like the rumble of a city or the chirping of birds that creates a sense of environment and atmosphere.
It's like how sound design in a movie can transport you somewhere else.
Yeah.
Even if you're not watching it.
Right.
Just listening, you can feel the mood.
Yeah. And then we can't forget about smell.
Yeah.
He emphasizes how smell adds another layer of depth,
Okay.
like allowing him to experience things like food or even a person's scent.
That's so interesting that he's like using smell to experience things.
Yeah.
Like it's not just a passive sense for him. It's like an active way of engaging with the world.
Right, like gathering information.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if for someone who, primarily experiences the world through these non-visual senses, if their dreams are even more vivid and multi-layered than what we can typically imagine.
Definitely possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes you question like our whole scientific understanding of dreams, which is so focused on visual processing.
Right, like maybe we're just scratching the surface.
Right, exactly.
And this is where things get kind of interesting because Angel doesn't just talk about the sensory aspects.
Yeah.
He also gets really personal and talks about experiencing erotic dreams, which is something he's like actually a little skeptical about science being able to fully explain.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because dreams are so tied to our emotions and desires.
Yeah.
Which are things that science maybe doesn't fully grasp yet.
Right. And it really humanizes this whole experience. He's not just talking about abstract concepts, but about like real deeply personal feelings. Mm-hmm. He also mentions that like right now his focus is on music as his main passion.
Oh, interesting.
Which makes his dream about performing even more intriguing.
Right. Like, could it be that his passion for music is kind of finding a new outlet?
Yeah.
Even shaping his dreams?
Yeah. Like his subconscious is being influenced by that, which I think leads us perfectly into the connection that he makes between dreams and creativity.
Okay, cool.
Because he talks about how his dreams have actually inspired him to pursue music more seriously.
Oh, wow. So it's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, like his dreams are fueling his waking life ambitions.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if we're all kind of underestimating the power of dreams to shape our creativity.
Right. Like, what if we could harness that power
Eh,
intentionally?
that's a great question. Like, imagine if we could all tap into our dreams as a source of inspiration.
Yeah. It'd be amazing,
Yeah.
to unlock that creative potential.
It's like a whole other dimension of our minds just waiting to be explored.
Definitely makes you think.
All right, so we've talked about the sensory experience of dreams for someone who's blind, but how about the emotional side of things?
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect because we often rely on visual cues to understand emotions, like facial expressions and body language.
Right, like how does that work when you don't have those visual cues?
Exactly. So I'm curious to hear how Angel addresses that in the video.
Well, he talked about how for him, emotions in dreams are conveyed through things like touch and sound.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, he might feel a sense of warmth and comfort when he's dreaming about someone he loves. Or he might hear a change in someone's tone of voice that indicates anger or sadness.
That's fascinating. So it's like his brain is finding other ways to represent those emotional nuances.
Yeah, and it makes you realize that emotions are not just about what we see. They're about a whole complex interplay of senses and feelings.
Right. It's like a much deeper understanding of emotions.
And I think this really challenges the way we typically think about empathy, because we often talk about seeing things from someone else's perspective. But what if we could also, like, feel or hear someone else's emotions?
That's a powerful idea. Like a whole new level of empathy.
Yeah, like expanding our capacity to connect with each other on a deeper level.
Definitely something to think about.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore in this video.
I know. I'm really curious to hear more about Angel's personal experiences and insights.
Me too. So let's jump back into the video and see where this deep dive takes us next.
Sounds good.
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
All right, so picking up where we left off, Angel is talking about a really interesting concept.
Okay.
The idea that dreams can actually help us solve problems.
Oh, that's cool. I've definitely heard of that before. Like people having those aha moments in their sleep.
Right. And he shares an example from his own life where he was struggling with a musical composition, and then he had a dream where he heard the solution.
Wow. So it was like his subconscious mind was working on it in the background.
Yeah, like his brain was making connections that he couldn't make while he was awake.
That's so cool. It makes you wonder if we could somehow train our brains to do that more intentionally.
Right. Like, what if we could all tap into that problem-solving power of our dreams?
I would love to be able to do that.
I know, me too. It would be amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not just about creative problem-solving. Angel also talks about how dreams can help us process emotions and work through difficult experiences.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like dreams can be a way of kind of sorting through our feelings and making sense of things.
Exactly. And he even mentions that he's had dreams that have helped him to forgive people who have hurt him.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Like using dreams as a tool for healing and growth.
Yeah, it's like our dreams can offer us a different perspective on things and help us to let go of negative emotions.
It's amazing to think about the potential of dreams to transform our lives.
I know. It's like this whole untapped resource that we all have access to. So we've been talking a lot about the serious stuff, but Angel also shares some really funny anecdotes about his experiences as a blind person.
Okay, I'm always up for a good story.
Me too.
Yeah.
So, for example, he talks about how when he was a kid, he was really curious about how things worked. And he would often take things apart to see what was inside.
Oh, no.
Because he couldn't see, he would sometimes accidentally break things.
I can imagine.
Like one time he took apart the agitator in his family's washing machine.
Oh, no.
Because he wanted to recreate the sound of car wipers.
That's hilarious.
It is. And it's a good reminder that even though we're talking about serious topics like dreams and disability, there's always room for humor and lightheartedness.
Absolutely. I think it's important to find the joy in everything.
Totally. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm just struck by how much we can learn from Angel's perspective.
Me too. It's really eye-opening.
It's like he's given us this whole new way of thinking about dreams and the power of our senses.
And the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
For sure. Like the way our brains can adapt and create meaning, even in the absence of sight.
It's incredibly inspiring, and it makes me wonder what other hidden depths are waiting to be uncovered within ourselves and within the world around us.
That's a great question to ponder. It's like an invitation to keep exploring and questioning and never stop learning.
Exactly. And that's what the deep dive is all about. So thank you for joining me on this journey.
Of course. This has been fascinating.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And listeners, we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic.
Can't wait.
Until then, keep those minds curious and keep those dreams alive.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
So welcome back to our deep dive into the world of dreams without sight.
It's amazing to think about how our brains can create such rich experiences, even without visual input.
It really is. It speaks to that whole concept of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
The brain's not just a fixed entity.
Yeah.
It's constantly rewiring itself based on our experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of rewiring, you mentioned that there's some scientific research that actually backs up Angel's claims about, these heightened senses in dreams.
Yeah, there have been some studies using brain imaging, like fMRI, to compare brain activity during dreams between sighted and blind people.
So what have they found?
Well, they found that the visual cortex,
Uh-huh.
which is the part of the brain that processes sight, is less active in blind individuals during dreaming.
Okay, that makes sense.
But other areas
Yeah.
that are associated with touch, sound, and spatial processing actually show increased activity.
So it's like their brains are compensating
Exactly.
by ramping up the activity in these other sensory areas.
Exactly. It's not just like speculation.
Right.
It's measurable evidence.
Wow, that's incredible. It's one thing to hear someone describe their dreams, subjectively,
Right.
but to actually see the neurological basis for it.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer of validation.
Yeah, for sure. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the differences between people who are born blind and those who lost their sight later in life.
Right. And some studies suggest that people who were born blind might have dreams that are even more heavily reliant on those non-visual senses.
So it's almost like their brains,
Yeah.
having never received visual input, have developed even stronger pathways
Exactly.
for processing other sensory information.
Yeah, it's like they've never had that visual experience.
Right.
So their brains have kind of adapted from the beginning.
That's mind-blowing. So someone who's never seen the color red, for
Right.
example, could still experience the concept of redness,
Uh-huh.
but through touch, sound,
Yeah.
or even smell.
Exactly. Their brains might create a totally different representation of red.
That's wild. It really challenges our assumptions about what constitutes a real experience.
It does. It shows how diverse human experience can be.
Yeah.
Even something as universal as dreaming can be so different.
This whole conversation is like making me rethink everything I thought I knew about dreams.
It's fascinating, right?
It is. And it raises some really interesting questions.
Like what?
Like, if dreams are a way for our brains to process emotions and experiences,
Yeah.
From our waking lives, how does that work for someone who doesn't rely on sight in the same way?
Right, because we always talk about dreams being like mental movies.
Yeah.
So what happens when you take away the visuals?
Right. Do the emotions just disappear?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, I think it's important to remember that visual imagery isn't the only way to process emotions.
Right. Yeah.
Like, think about music.
Uh-huh.
Music can evoke such strong feelings
Yeah.
without any visuals.
A powerful song can make you feel joy, sadness, anger,
It's-
through the melody and the lyrics.
Right. And in the same way, dreams can tap into a whole range of emotions
Okay.
beyond just visual imagery.
Yeah.
So for someone who's blind,
Yeah.
those other senses, the feel of a loved one's hand,
Yeah.
the sound of laughter, the scent of a familiar place,
Mhm.
those can carry just as much emotional weight.
So it's about the brain finding alternative pathways
Exactly.
to represent those emotional experiences. Instead of a mental movie, it might be more like a
Right.
mental symphony
Yes.
or a mental tapestry.
I love that. A mental symphony or a mental tapestry.
It really captures that richness and the multi-layered nature of dreams for people who are blind.
It does. It's amazing how adaptable the brain is.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to Angel's skepticism about science being able to fully explain certain aspects of dreams,
Yeah.
like those erotic dreams he talked about.
Right, because maybe there are just some things that go beyond what we can currently measure and analyze.
Yeah, maybe science doesn't have all the answers yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this field so exciting.
Right.
There's still so much we don't know.
Okay, so we've talked about the neurological evidence, the potential differences between those born blind and those who lost their sight later, and the way the brain might find these alternative pathways to process emotions. Right.
Where do we go from here? What
Yeah.
are the implications of all this research?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that studying the dreams of blind individuals can actually help us understand dreams in general.
So it's not just about dreams without sight.
No.
It's about expanding our understanding of dreams as a whole.
Exactly. And to further enrich our understanding,
Yeah.
I think it's time we hear from another expert.
Okay, I'm all for that.
Eh.
Who are we turning to next?
In part 3 of this deep dive, we'll be joined by Dr. Amani Meidi,
Okay.
who is a renowned sleep researcher who has done a lot of work on the dreams of blind individuals.
Wow, I'm already eager to hear what she has to say.
Me too.
So listeners, make sure you tune in for part 3, where we'll continue our exploration of this incredible and often overlooked aspect of human experience.
It's going to be good.
Welcome back, Dream Explorers. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the world of dreams without sight. And I am so excited for our final guest. It's like we've been building up to this all episode.
I know it's going to be good. So to add like another layer of expertise to this conversation, we have Dr. Amani Meidi joining us. She is a leading sleep researcher, and she's dedicated her career to understanding the nuances of dreaming, particularly in blind individuals.
Amazing.
So Dr. Meidi, welcome to the deep dive. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been following along with the conversation, and it's so refreshing to hear such a thoughtful and, insightful discussion on this topic.
Well, we've been discussing how blind individuals experience dreams, and Angel's personal account really opened our eyes to the heightened role of the other senses. So I'm curious, Dr. Meidi, what initially sparked your interest in this specific area of research?
Like many, I've always been fascinated by dreams, but early in my career, I realized that most of the research was really focused on the dreams of sighted people. And I just became so curious about how the absence of visual experience might shape the dream world and what we could learn from those differences.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's like we're missing a whole piece of the puzzle
Ex-
when we only focus on one perspective. So in your research, what are some of the most striking discoveries that you've made about the dreams of blind individuals?
Well, one of the most consistent findings is the heightened presence of other sensory modalities in their dreams. So as Angel described, touch, sound, smell, taste, even spatial awareness, they all become much more prominent.
That aligns with the research you were talking about earlier
Right.
about the increased activity in those non-visual brain areas
Yeah.
during dreaming. So it's not just anecdotal. It seems like a consistent pattern.
Absolutely. The brain beautifully compensates for the lack of visual input by amplifying these other sensory channels, and this allows for a really, rich and immersive dream experience.
It's funny because we often use these visual metaphors when we talk about dreams,
We do.
like watching a movie or seeing images. But what you're describing is something far more multi-layered. It's like their dreams become these incredible, tapestries of sound and texture and emotion woven together.
I love that description. And it's not just about the intensity of these senses, it's about how they're used to create meaning and to tell stories within the dream.
Could you give us an example of how those senses might weave together to create a narrative?
Sure. So one participant in my research who was born blind described a dream where she was walking through a forest. And she couldn't see the trees, obviously, but she could feel the rough bark against her skin. She could hear the wind rustling through the leaves and smell the damp earth. And all of those sensory details create this really vivid sense of place and atmosphere, allowing her to experience the forest in a way that was just as real and meaningful as any visual representation.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like she's painting a picture with her senses.
Exactly.
And it challenges that notion that you need sight to truly experience something.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that the human experience, particularly in the realm of dreams, is far more diverse and nuanced than we often give it credit for.
This kind of leads to another question that we've been pondering. If dreams are a way for our brains to process emotions, how does that work for someone who doesn't rely on visual cues, like, facial expressions?
That's a great question. While visual cues are certainly important for emotional recognition in our waking lives, they're not the only way that we perceive emotions.
Right.
Tone of voice, body language, even the context of a situation can convey a wealth of information.
So for someone who's blind, those elements might become even more pronounced in their dreams.
Exactly.
Like they're hyper aware of these subtle shifts in tone or changes in the soundscape that signal, emotional shifts.
Precisely. We found that blind dreamers often pay very close attention to the tone and inflection of voices in their dreams, and they're highly attuned to the emotional atmosphere that's created by sounds and other sensory details. It's like they've become masters at reading between the lines.
It's fascinating. It makes you wonder if we could all be more attuned to those subtle cues.
Right.
If we could all kind of tap into that.
Yeah, like maybe we're all walking around with these untapped abilities to perceive emotions in ways we haven't even considered.
Absolutely.
It's pretty mind-blowing, Dr. Meady. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up our deep dive into this world of dreams without sight?
I would just encourage everyone to embrace the mystery and wonder of dreams, whether they involve visual imagery or a symphony of other senses. Dreams are a powerful window into the workings of our minds, and by exploring them with curiosity and openness, we can learn so much about ourselves and about the nature of human consciousness.
Such a beautiful sentiment. Dr. Meady, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. You've really given us all a lot to think about, to dream about even.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
And listeners, we hope this deep dive has, sparked your curiosity and maybe expanded your understanding of this incredible and often overlooked aspect of human experience. Remember, there's still so much to discover about this topic, so keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep dreaming.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. So thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, stay curious.
Bye, everyone.
Bye!